So today I'll be explaining about adjacent, vertical, supplementary, and complementary angles. The first one is adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are side by side and share a common ray. As you can see here, we have an example of what we call adjacent pairs of adjacent angles. In this case, it's 45-degree and 15-degree. So why do they are pairs of adjacent angles? Because if you see here, actually this we have an angle here. Let's name all of the. We have a vertex of A. Let's say we have ray AB and ray AC here, right? So basically, ray AB and ray AC has an angle, right? Like here, right? And then we have another ray in here, right? This blue one. Let's say this is ray AD, right? So this ray AD split this angle into two parts, right? Which is 45-degree and 50-degree. So these two, because they're side by side angles and share a common ray, which is ray A, so which means that the 45-degree and the 15-degree in this image are pairs of adjacent angles. Okay. So another example of adjacent angles. Here we go. So the same thing like before. I'm going to name that. I'm going to name this vertex with A. Let's say, and this one is ray AB and then ray AC. And I have another ray system here. So since ray AB and ray AC and ray AD share the common vertex, which is vertex A, right? This is vertex, and ray AD splits the angle of that has been made by AB and SE into two parts, which is this 35 and 55. And because they are side by side, then we can say that this 35-degree and this 55-degree are pairs of adjacent angles. There we go. So here we go. So it's the same thing like this one, right? Side by side. This is also side by side, and this is side by side, and they share the same vertex, right? They have only one vertex. Okay, so example of not adjacent angles, not a pairs of adjacent angles. So the first one is I'm going to focus here, right, guys? So we have an angle here, in which let's name that with ray A. Let's say ray AB and ray AC. But this one, remember, guys, that you cannot have the same exact name of a point if it's not on the point. So do not name this with A, B, or C because we have already used that in this image here. So let's name that with D, and this is, let's say, it's E, and this is F. So since this 50-degree and this 100 degree doesn't share the same vertex, right, or the same ray, this A and D, right, then they are not adjacent angles. Okay, that's the first example. The second example is this one here, right? So although they have this one vertex in which they have this 35 and 35, right, degree, they've, oh, pa, this is we call it the this is it has the same vertex path, right? This 35 and 35 have the same vertex, but they are not side by side, okay? Because this one side by side with this one or with this one, right? Let's say name it with X, or this name is Y. 35, yes, it is side by side by X. 30, this 35 is also side by side by Y, but this 35 does not side by side with this 35. So that's why it is not adjacent. Okay, the last example is this one here. We have 55-degree and 45-degree. So again, although they share the common ray or vertex like this one. Let's say name this vertex with A, right? This one has the same vertex, right? So this angle has the vertex of A. This angle also has a vertex of A. But since they do not form in side by side, right? So they're not adjacent. So let's name this. Let's say I have an angle here. Let's name it with x angle, x degree. I don't know what the measurements is. So this 55 is side by side with this one. So this 55 degree will be adjacent to this x, and this 45 also going to be adjacent with this 40, with this x because they're side by side. But 55 and 45, because they are not side by side, then we cannot say that they are pairs of adjacent angles. The next one is a vertical angle. So when two lines or two line segment intersect, they make vertical angles. Okay, and here the examples are two lines. There are two lines here in which they intersect. Intersect means that they are meeting in one point. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know is that this meeting point here, right? Let's name that point with A, right? This A point is what we call the intersection point. Okay, so this point in which these two lines met is what we call the intersection points. Okay, so let's go back to vertical angles. So vertical angles are when two lines intersect, they make vertical angles. So which of these, like 75, 105, 75, 105, are pairs of vertical angles? So basically, guys, so the vertical angles are opposite to one another. So this 75 in here will be opposite with this one here, because the direction of this angle is going that way, right? It's facing that way, and this one is facing that way, right? So it's opposite to each other. So this 75, let's name that. Let's name this with C angle, right? Angle C, and this is angle D maybe. So which means that angle C and angle D are opposite, right? Because they are opposite, so we can call them pairs of vertical angles. Pairs of vertical angles. Okay. So and so does the one on the left and the right side. So it's 105, right? So let's name that with the angle E and angle F. Let's name that. So angle E and angle F, because they're opposite, right? So this one facing that way, this one facing that way, right? So which means that they are pairs of vertical angles, right? Okay, so the next one that you need to know that if you see a pair of vertical angles, the size or the measurements of the angles are equal, okay, or we call it congruent. As you can see that this angle here is opposite to this angle here, right? Right, that one is going that way, that one is going that way. So it means that these two angles are pairs of vertical angles. And as you can see here is that the size are the same, right? The size of the angle is going to be the same. So the same thing like these angle here. We have this angle here and this angle here, right? These two angles are also opposite, right? Going that way and going to the other way, right? So because they are opposite, then we can say that these two angles are pairs of vertical angles, and they will have the same exact size of angles. Here 30-degree, and this also 30. The next one is what we call the supplementary angles. So supplementary angles are angles in which if you add them up, it will be equals to 180 degree. Okay. So let's say I have an example here. The first one here, we have adjacent angles of these two angles, which is 120 and 60 degree. If we add these two, right, so 120 plus 60 will be equal to 180 degree, exactly 180 degree. So if you add these two angles and they add up to 180 degrees, so we can say that 120 degree and 60 degree are supplementary angles. Okay, so in this case, this is adjacent and supplementary angles because they are side by side. Another example here is when we see two angles which is not adjacent, like this one here, this one. right? And but if we add these two angles, it will come up into like let's add them up. It will be exactly 180 degree. Then we can say that they are supplementary angles. Okay, the next one is the complementary angles. The difference between supplementary and complementary is pretty simple. Supplementary add up to 180, while complementary angles add up to 90 degrees. So that's the only difference. Okay, so the first example here, we have this one here, and we see two angles in which they share the same ray and they are next to each other. It means that they are adjacent. And if we add these two angles, 30 plus 60, if you add them up, 30 plus 60, it will be equals to 90 degree, right? So 90 degree, exactly 90 degree, if you add these two angles, it means that 30 and 60 are what we call the complementary angles. So complementary angles is pairs of angles in which if you add them up, it is equals to 90 degree. Okay, let's go to the next example. There on the right side, we have another two angles in here, 40 degree and 50 degree, right? These two angles are not adjacent because they're not side by side, and they do not share the same ray or the same vertex. And but if we add these two angles, 40 plus 50 is going to be equals to exactly 90 degree, right? So it means that these two angles are complementary angles. Remember that complementary angles needs to have more than one angles. Okay, so it's like 40 and 50 or 30 and 60 or maybe 89 and 1, right? Because you add them up equals to 90 degrees. So it needs to have pairs. So these two are pairs of complementary angles.